Well, welcome everyone. I am keenly aware that I'm doing a web development talk at an Android conference, and so I wasn't even sure if anyone was going to show up. I really appreciate everyone who came here, especially if you're coming out of your comfort zone to see a talk about web development. I assume like most people here, I fell in love with Kotlin through working on Android, and then a few years later after that, I fell in love with the Compose APIs. Basically, a few years ago, JetBrains released something called Compose HTML, and it really fascinated me. So fast forward to today, let me share Kaba with you all. We're going to be spending a lot of time in this talk, looking at low-level details, some foundational concepts, and I want to give that some context. So the first thing I'm going to do is walk through some real Kaba websites that people have already created. I'm hoping that when we get to the building blocks later, this will at least give you some context for what we can build with them. So Benet is a recent graduate, and he created a portfolio site showcasing his projects and skills. And honestly, if you're looking for an initial project that's well-scoped to get you into practicing web development, a portfolio is a really great option. Core is a library for creating Minecraft data packs. If you are a Minecraft fan, I recommend checking out this project and consider giving it a star. And Afri, the author of the library, he basically built a landing page for his project in Cobweb, as well as some tutorial articles. Our most prolific contributor, who's in the audience, created this chess game using a open source JavaScript library called chessboard.js. Basically put this together in a day. His software will be showing up again later in this talk. Now, the previous three projects were hobby projects, but some brave souls are actually using Cobweb in a professional context. So here there's a user, Phoenix Red Wolf, who actually provides digital services, and he created a website that advertises his services. As you saw there are some really slick animations across the site. It also supports a responsive design, and it has dark and light modes. And finally, I want to showcase Fluens. One of our users is creating a language learning website. As you can see, they got full localization working with Cobweb. And they also, in Cobweb, wrote a blog talking about how they accomplished this technically. We're almost ready to jump in. I just want to give a few words of caution. Cobweb is not 1.0 yet. We try really hard not to break everybody, but you should expect things to get deprecated at some point. There's some features that are still missing, et cetera. Cobweb is not a shared UI framework, so a lot of people in here may have heard about Compose multi-platform for web, which JetBrains is pushing. Their promise is that it's one code base for many targets. I actually think that there's some cons that a lot of people don't know, and that might not be right for their project. But that's kind of aside the point. What I just want to let you know is that Cobweb is not that approach, and we'll be talking more about that later. And it's still early days for Cobweb, still early days for Kotlin web development. If you are doing stuff in JavaScript, there's going to be hundreds of blogs and videos for any question that you might have. But here in Kotlin, you might have to expect that you might be the first person asking a question, or you're asking a question and it might be hard to get an answer. I'm sure everyone in this room can handle it, but I just thought I would mention it ahead of time. Cobweb is built on top of Compose HTML. Let's make sure everybody understands what Compose HTML looks like. And to do that, we're going to start with a little bit of HTML. So this is a really simple HTML example. It's a div element that has two attributes, an ID attribute and a style attribute. The style attribute is a special one, which you can set to a bunch of style properties that basically control the look and feel of the element. And this is what Compose HTML looks like. So for every HTML element, you have a associated composable. And these composables take in what is called an adders block. And within an adders block, you can basically define attribute key value pairs. And under this nested style block, you can do property key value pairs. It's error-prone to write raw strings, so of course, the API also provides type-safe direct method calls you could use instead. If they're ever missing one, you can always just use the raw adder or property calls. So there's an escape hatch, which I actually like a lot, and Cobweb extends that idea in its own APIs. Finally, you may have heard about CSS. It's basically a way to separate your styles and your HTML structure. So here I took the styles from our previous example and moved them into this CSS style sheet file. And I defined it with basically a class selector. So basically any element that defines that class will have that style applied to it by the browser at runtime. And as you can see, I just took my div element and I applied that class to it. So what this looks like in Compose HTML is you can basically create a singleton object that inherits from the style sheet class, and you can define styles in there. And because it's a singleton, then when you're in your composable in Compose HTML, you can actually reference it. As I said, JetBrains is pushing Compose multi-platform for web, and I'm saying you might want to consider Compose HTML. So why is that? There's several reasons. I think some big ones that might be important to people in this room is Compose HTML is a much smaller download size. I mean, you might be looking at things that are sites that are actually like 10 times smaller, maybe even more. Basically, Compose HTML creates an HTML structure that is inspectable and interactable with browser dev tools. And if you haven't used them, browser dev tools are very powerful. They're really amazing. And finally, Compose HTML is compatible with basically every JS framework that is out there. There's 20 years of the web. There's just so much great software out there. And to be able to use it and integrate with it is a real powerful advantage. All right, let's go over to Cobweb. Why did I create Cobweb? Compose HTML is very impressive technology. I'm familiar with some JavaScript frameworks and tools, and there's some really nice stuff out there, and I just wanted to take some of the learnings from those and apply it to Compose HTML to make it even better. Live reloading is something that was very important to me to make sure it was working from the ground up. Sometimes people add live reloading support after the fact. There's a lot of Gradle experts in here, I'm guessing, and so some of you are probably thinking, okay, he just put the continuous flag into Gradle and is taking credit for it. And we do that, but I promise there's a lot more to this feature besides that. For example, Cobweb, we'll talk about it later, has a server component, and the server component also features total live reloading behavior. If I couldn't have gotten this live reloading experience to work at the beginning, I would have abandoned Cobweb before it even really got going. Routing. So Compose HTML basically creates something called an SPA, or a single page application. It's basically, you could think of it as like a shell where you dynamically add and remove elements live. And that's great, but a lot of new users, one of the first things they want to know how to do is, how do I add support where if I type stuff into my browser URL bar, I can navigate around the site that way? You could solve it manually. There's libraries to do it. Personally, I think when you want to make a website, you don't really care that much about how to do it. You just want it to work. So Cobweb offers support for this right out of the box, and we'll be talking about this in more detail shortly. Basically, another thing to know about Compose HTML is it basically is an empty indexed HTML file with some heavy JavaScript, which is what does the rendering and the reorganizing of elements. And that's great, but if you're a robot that indexes websites, there's no guarantee that you'll even run the JavaScript or even be able to. So it'll just see an empty website and move on. What Cobweb does is it has an export process that will go through all of the pages that you've defined in your site and snapshot them into basically raw XML files, and that makes them completely compatible with indexers, so you'll show up in Google searches. I believe that Markdown support should be a first-class citizen in any web framework. I've definitely worked with other web frameworks where they have all these instructions of how to do it, and it's like, do you want server-side Markdown flavor, client-side? And I'm like, I don't care, I just want it. So I'm the author of this framework. It has Markdown support. And finally, Compose HTML and Jetpack Compose, they are different domains. So as a result, even though there are some shared primitives like remember and mutable state of, the APIs, as you saw before, they look a little bit different. That being said, I think there's a lot of great things to take out of Jetpack Compose. And so whenever we can, we take concepts from there and we implement it with sort of a web backing. I've had users say just because we have box, row, and column, that working with Cobweb is much nicer than working with basically raw HTML. Cobweb is built out of 4 parts. We have a CLI binary, and we'll be showing an example of that very shortly. We have Gradle plugins. This allows us to basically build an understanding of your code base, which lets us generate a lot of boring boilerplate for you. We have a survey, which we'll show at the end of the talk, which basically lets you do a lot of rich backend behavior very easily. And then I think the most self-explanatory part is we have a library. That is the code that you're going to be interacting with in your own site. So the very first thing you want to do if you're interested in trying Cobweb is install the Cobweb binary. You could download it from GitHub. You can build it from source. However, we also support these 3 package managers that give us really good coverage across all the major OSs. And we recommend you use one of these if you can, because it makes it really easy to update when things change. So here I'm going to use the cobweb binary. I'm going to use the create command. You can create one of several templates, and we also have a bunch of examples. The app template is a really good intro site. It's relatively small. You can learn a lot from it. And just by doing this, we now have all of these files created for you, ready to go. I don't want you to worry about the files that you see here. What I do want to point out is that there's no index.html file in it or no main.kt file in it. Because basically what I want you to do is just create your website, and we'll handle the glue code for you. Let's walk through the build script that it creates, because we're not going to really have that much more time to talk about it later. What you can see here is we apply the Cobweb application plugin. Like Android, there is also a library plugin. We unfortunately don't have time to talk about it in this talk. But by applying it, it lets us create this Cobweb initialization block, and you can set a bunch of parameters here. We also provide this utility function for the Kotlin block. It does nice, also basically, the theme here is we're removing boilerplate that you would have to write yourself, and in this case, we remove some Gradle boilerplate. We also generate a file called conf.yaml for the Cobweb configuration, and this is mostly used by the server. You may never even have to look in here, but one thing that you might want to note is that we come up with a default port number if you're wondering where it comes from, and if you need to change it, you can change it in this file. Once now that we have this app instantiated, we're going to run it. And Cobweb run is the very powerful, most common command that you're going to run. When you run it, it starts compiling. This is also putting your project into a live reload mode. So essentially, once your server is up, you could actually start editing code, and if you save it, it's going to automatically recompile. When you're done and you're happy with how the site looks like in dev mode, what you'll do is you'll exit out and you'll run a Cobweb export. As I said before, this is basically going through all of your pages and snapshotting it. I sped it up because of editing magic, but this normally takes about 30 seconds. And then you can use the Cobweb run command again with a production environment to test it. And because all it's doing is serving static files, it spins up really quickly. Jetpack Compose has the modifier concept. I actually thought that this was a core primitive of Compose, and it turns out it isn't. Compose HTML does not have a modifier, but we decided to put it in because we think it's useful. So let's give an example of what that looks like. So this is our example from before. So at the top is HTML, and the bottom is the Compose HTML code. So here, what you have is we've introduced the adders modifier and style modifier blocks. And you can see that kind of lets us bridge over to the Compose HTML world. We can call the same calls there. And also, like how Compose HTML has a lot of ways to simplify, we have a lot of ways to also directly call methods. So you don't have to call adders modifier or style modifier blocks yourself. It's also worth noting that we're trying to have everything we're trying to provide everything, but if we're ever missing anything, at least you know you can use these raw access to the lower level adders and style modifiers directly. So yeah, just to compare the left side and the right side. Left side is what Cobweb looks like. Right side is Compose HTML. One interesting thing to call out here is in Compose HTML, they kind of mimic the raw HTML where the attribute and the properties or style properties are kind of have this nested hierarchical style. Whereas in Cobweb, it kind of is all sort of treated as siblings. And this might seem like we're losing useful information. In practice, 99% of all modifiers are style modifiers. The number of attribute modifiers aren't that many, so you'll learn them very quickly. So yeah, in practice, it hasn't been a problem. I really want to emphasize that the modifier code in Cobweb is a fork. I wrote it myself. It uses the same API as the one in Jetpack Compose, but there are some fundamental differences. So here's 3 cases that Android developers might recognize. You have padding coming first, before the width, after the width, and then in one case surrounding it. These create 3 different layouts in Android, but in Cobweb, these all produce the exact same thing. They basically create an HTML element in it with padding set to 20 and width set to 100%. In the right-hand case, where we have the padding set twice, what that does in Cobweb is the latter call will overwrite the first. It doesn't matter in this case because of the same value, but if it was different values, the latter call would take precedence. So Cobweb is similar to Jetpack Compose. It makes it, nicer for Android developers to kind of get used to the new environment, but it is not the same. All right, let's jump into routing, because routing is very important. And we'll start with an example route. Just so you know, in the world of web, this last part of a URL is called a slug, so I might start using that term, and I want you to understand what it means. So yeah, how do we create some code that gets served at this slug? What you do is you create a file underneath this pages folder. So the pages folder is special. And once you've done that, Cobweb will find the file name, and it will lowercase it and get a slug out of it. So then what you do is you create a composable, and all you have to do is annotate it with page. It's otherwise just a normal composable. So just by creating a composable and annotating it with page and making sure it's under the pages package, we now have a route. A lot of routes in actual websites, they end up in a slash, so you can almost think of it as like an invisible or an empty route slug name. So how do we accomplish that? So Cobweb says that the index name is special. So if you have a file named index, it's going to get converted into sort of what looks like this folder syntax. A lot of slugs have hyphens in them, and in fact, Google recommends hyphens as a way to separate words in your URLs. So it's not really common to put hyphens into your file names. So what do? Cobweb detects title case, and it'll find the word boundaries and basically lowercase everything and put a hyphen in the middle for you. Now we're going to deal with we have some subfolders. I think you might not be surprised to know that to create subfolders in Cobweb, all you need to do is create subpackages under the package folder. So that's all I'm doing, and that's all you need to do. Now note that numbers are not valid packages in Kotlin. So what you tend to do in that case is you put underscores to make it valid. Cobweb detects leading underscores and just trims them for you. And once again, Google recommends hyphens in your words. So here we're putting hyphens. We want a hyphen in where our package name should generate, and just use basically title case or camel case for that, and Cobweb will detect it. Cobweb will also detect underscores, which are valid things that some people use in package names. Just note that the official Kotlin conventions discourage it, so I'm not recommending it here. Now I told you before that Cobweb aggressively lowercases your routes because it looks really clean. That being said, this could be a valid case where you actually want all caps. And so what do you do when Cobweb wants to do something that you don't want it to do? Well, you can pass a value into the page annotation, and in that way, we won't do anything. We'll do whatever you ask us to do. And so it's a really nice thing that if we ever do anything you disagree with, you could escape from that. All right, now we're looking at this subfolder. 1.0.0, there's no way you're going to get a package name to look like that. And a subfolder is not a page, so what do? Cobweb introduces an annotation called package mapping. And this is really weird the first time I saw it, but what we're doing is we're creating a file targeting annotation, and Cobweb will find that file, will ask what package it is, and then it'll set up the transformation automatically for you. So it looks like this, all right? If you're ever in a Cobweb project, you'll have a folder, we'll have a package mapping in it, and then all of the pages of that. The file does not have to be called package mapping. This is a convention, but we recommend it, so if anyone looks at your Cobweb project, they'll be able to see at a glance what's going on. So a lot of websites, they'll do this thing where essentially a part of the route is something that should kind of be captured. So here you can see like the username and the post ID is kind of something that you want to put into a variable. So first, let's look at the route and think about it with sort of making these variable names stand out. So you could use the route overriding feature, and if you put it in curly braces, that instructs Cobweb to basically say if somebody visits a site that matches essentially this pattern, basically take the values out of it and put it into a variable that the user can access in their code. We'll show you how to access that in just a bit. And finally, if you have a package where the name or a page with the file name already matches the name that you want to use anyways, you could use empty curly braces, and Cobweb figures it out from context. Speaking of context, anytime you are inside a page composable, you can call this remember page context method. It'll give you this object which has access to information about the current route that you're in. But more importantly, it has access to query parameters. So it's very easy if you want to access query parameters from your route. What you do is you do context.route.params.getValue, and basically that's all you need to do. All right, and now we could finally answer the question is how do we pull these variables out of the dynamic route? Actually, we do the exact same thing, context.route.params.getValue, and all of a sudden you have a working page that can dynamically respond to all sorts of inputs. Some astute people watching right now might think, well, if you're using the exact same class, context.route.params for both, What if you have a name that clashes, right? What if you have user here and then user as a query parameter? And I mean, the short answer is you shouldn't do that. That's really confusing. But the longer answer is there is a context.route.query params map as well, which you can use if you ever need to distinguish between the two. All right, let's move away from code for a little bit and talk about project organization. So we're going to step out of the pages folder that we were just in. And I said that was a very special folder that had to be named that way. It is configurable, but for now, just assume it's a magical folder. Meanwhile, there's a lot of patterns that we've seen across many websites, so we want to recommend a general organization style. So basically, what we say is you should create a components folder with a layouts, sections, and widgets subfolder. So layouts are where you put things that are basically roots that basically define the outer style of your whole page. Many websites may only ever have a single layout. Here, you can imagine we have a basic layout for most of the site, and then maybe a different layout for if we're writing articles within that site. Sections sort of represent general areas that are shared across layouts very commonly. And then widgets are just low-level components. So I think those are self-explanatory. So there's no need. You don't have to name these things this way. However, if you do it, you're going to basically be able to find yourself in familiar ground, both when you're in your own project and look at other people's projects. So yeah, here is an implementation of a layout. So layouts can take a bunch of arguments. They're just composables, but they should also take this content callback. And I also wanted to showcase here, our page layout is delegating to these nav header and footer sections, which is a pattern that you'll see in a lot of layouts. And now we're defining our page. Our page should depend on a layout. You have to call it manually, but any page you have, the very first thing you'd likely expect to see is this layout composable wrapping the rest of your content. And then stepping out again, one level higher than the JS main folder, you have your resources folder. And basically, anything you put under the public folder of your resources folder will be exposed to your site. So here, Buster is my dog, so I put in an image of him. Once I've done that, I could reference that path in this image element. And just like that, easy peasy, I get access to my dog's image. All right, we're going to move into Silk. So Cobweb Core has been really focused on navigation and routing. Silk is more of where all the UI presentation goes. It's worth noting that you can use Cobweb without Silk, and you could use Silk without Cobweb, but they are designed to work well together. Cobweb introduces quite a few widgets. By 1.0, we want to have a couple dozen of them, so we're not there yet, but I'll do a quick tour through what we do have. It's worth noting that we are inspired by Jetpack Compose. We want all of our widgets to look like they would fit well within the way that you would see a widget inside Jetpack Compose. And in many cases, the button actually looks essentially identical. Here we have checkboxes and switches. We do the pattern where you sort of pass a value in, and then they use state hoisting, so they pass a callback out that then the caller is responsible for using to update the state. It's a pretty standard pattern, and we embrace it in Cobweb. Here's another example. These are inputs. You do the same thing. We're passing the text down, and then we modify it when the text input tells us that the text has changed. It's worth noting that there's actually an HTML input component, and Compose HTML has their own input widget, which is actually kind of confusing to use. It has two modes. It has a controlled mode and an uncontrolled mode, and sometimes you don't realize which one you're using. And so the end effect is you're going to have like this empty text input, and you're going to try typing in it, and nothing's going to come out, and you don't really know what's going on. And you're using the wrong mode. With Cobweb, you don't worry about it. Everything just behaves consistently and the same across different widgets. And finally, I really want to showcase this tooltip widget because you do not want to write this yourself. It was a pain. But it's really cool. I mean, basically what you can do is you basically call this composable. You pass in this concept of an element target. We've predefined a few. Here, previous sibling is the most common. You could also search by ID. You could actually create total custom element target implementations if you want something that's unique to finding another element in your site. And so, yeah, you could basically start with a site, put a bunch of icon buttons in it, and then easily tag them with tooltips, and your site becomes a lot more accessible. Every Cobweb widget takes in an optional variant parameter. So what you want to think about is with Cobweb widgets, there's a core style that it wraps internally, but variants are a way that you can kind of tweak those styles. And many of the Cobweb widgets will basically provide some of their own for you. So in the case of text input, we have these 4 different variant styles. You can always basically take the core style yourself and add your own variant. This can be very useful if you want to create some site-branded version of a button, for example. All right, now we're going to move on to, I think, one of the most powerful concepts in Silk, which is called CSS style. So one thing you might see in many actual HTML sites, and even this can happen in composed HTML sites, and it's the reason that sometimes HTML development has a bad name, is you get these giant monolithic style sheets that are just impossible to navigate, really hard to maintain. But what Cobweb does is you basically define these small CSS style blocks next to the code that uses them. So let's see what this looks like. So here's the example from before where we have the rect CSS and the HTML bits. And here's our previous, where we left the Cobweb code, where we had basically these modifiers. We want to plot the width and height values into a CSS style. So this is what it looks like. You basically create a top-level variable, and you assign it to a CSS style block, and you put your style modifiers in there. And just by doing that, you can convert that style into a modifier, and now you're back to the way that things were before, with your styles essentially separated. Now note, there's still the ID attribute modifier, and you cannot put that in the CSS style block, because the CSS style block can only support style modifiers. If you actually put an attribute modifier in there accidentally, you'll get a runtime exception with a bunch of information that's helping you debug what caused it. However, CSS style does take an optional extra modifier parameter, which you can use with attribute modifiers. And just by the nature of doing all of these things, we've now turned our div call into a really clean one-liner. So you may have noticed that I put everything inside of a base block, and let me explain what that means. So essentially, anytime you declare a CSS style, the base part of that style will always be applied first. CSS has a way to basically target elements in a certain state. Hover is probably the most common one used almost all the time. And so basically what you're seeing here is that you have this base style, which basically sets your, the size of this element and its original color. But then when it's in a hover state, we're going to change the color. And that basically looks hopefully like what you'd expect. And so yes, so the base is always applied first, and then additional styles are layered on top of them. Now, even though it's convenient, I would say a majority of your CSS styles are actually going to be ones that only have a base block. And this just feels like wasted nesting. So Cobweb always provides a convenient base method which lets you essentially extract out the nesting. All right, so let's look at this really neat aspect of CSS style. So you can extend a style. So what you do is you declare your original style. So here it's a orange square. And you could extend it. And what this is going to do is create a brand new style which essentially internally layers on top of the other style. And now that I've defined these two styles, I can create two different boxes which each convert those styles into modifiers. And once again, I hope this looks basically like what you would expect. The last thing I want to call out here is our contributor who did the chess playground. They also made this really great tool. So when you're going to be playing around with Cobweb, you're going to have to learn HTML and CSS, and there's a lot of it on the internet. But converting that from CSS style into Cobweb code can be a bit of a pain. So we have this website where you can basically paste CSS into it, and it'll convert it into the corresponding Cobweb code. All right, color mode. Basically, every Silk project is color mode aware. What that means is there's a global concept of light and dark, and all Silk widgets are color mode aware. So working with color mode is really simple. So here what we've done is we've sort of extracted, or we've queried what the current color mode is. We have a button where when we click it, it modifies what the color mode is, and then we query it to show what icon to render. And just by doing that, we essentially have created a really simple couple of lines color mode button. Now here you can see the white background when it just became black. So that is a Silk surface. And so just by basically having your Silk app have a Silk surface behind it, you can create this button and it'll automatically cause your whole website to animate. And okay, fine. So Silk widgets are color mode aware. How about your styles? Well, it's very easy. Anytime you're inside a CSS style block, you can access this read-only color mode property, and you can query it. And just like that, now you can create your own element, which is also color mode aware when you press that color button. All right, responsive designs. I'm not going to have time to do this justice, but I'll do my best. Many new Cobweb users will ask, okay, how do I make a different layout for mobile versus desktop? And the answer here is breakpoint styles. Breakpoint is a web concept. It's short for design breakpoints. It's really confusing, has nothing to do with debug breakpoints, but it basically says when my site is at a certain width, apply this style. So really when you see this this base and these breakpoints, what you should think about is base corresponds to mobile, small corresponds to tablet, medium is regular monitors, and large is ultra wide. So you can kind of guess what's going to happen. Like you can kind of see how users might branch their styles based on the width of their styles. And then there's also CSS styles, which let you turn elements on and off, which is how you can accomplish some really advanced effects. Icons, super quick. When I was working on Cobweb, I really wanted icons. I wanted them to be easy. Font Awesome is a really popular library, and they've got, here you can see 2,000 icons that are free that you can search. So all you do is you add a dependency on the Font Awesome icons library, and then you can access all of them by just prepending it with this FA prefix. And just like that, your site has Font Awesome icons in it. We also have support for material design icons. The contributor for this feature is also in the room, so thank you very much. And just like Font Awesome, you just prepend it with MDI, and you're good to go. All right, Markdown. To enable Markdown in your site, you apply the Markdown plugin, and you add a dependency on the library. When you've done that, you can add a sibling folder to the public folder. Anytime you put any Markdown under it, Cobweb will discover it, convert it into a Cobweb page. Just like that, a simple Markdown, and you have, you're serving a new page. Cobweb Flavor Markdown supports an optional front matter block. Basically, this is just a YAML block with key value pairs. Cobweb consumes some of them. In this case, it's consuming the root to know what sort of layout to wrap the generated page with. But these author and tags metadata can be exposed to the user, and you could use it however you want. So here we have our old friend, remember page context. You can query the Markdown property if it's a page generated from Markdown, and you can query the front matter values from there. You can call code within Cobweb Markdown. Basically, just reference a path to your code, and it'll just work. The interesting thing I hope you see here is that if your path is prepended with a period, Cobweb will know your website's group, and it'll automatically prepend it for you. So it cuts down some of what you have to type. But you could also add imports, and by doing that, you could even shorten your calls even more. All right. Last section, we're going to talk about Cobweb backend, or full stack. So when I first started working on Cobweb, I only supported full stack because that to me was the basic case that I wanted to make sure worked. And then in practice, I learned that most people don't need it. So static here does not refer to static as in not changing, but it refers to static hosting providers, which are very common. These are dumb hosting providers, which they just want you to give them a bunch of files in a structure, and they'll deploy it for you. So essentially, my recommendation is to always only use that layout if you can help it, just because it's cheap or even free to host such sites. They deploy much faster. It's much easier to deploy. And as I said, there's way more hosting solutions available for it. But sometimes you need to create a custom backend because maybe you have like an API key that you're hiding, or you need to talk to some other internal resources at your company. If you want to enable full stack, what you do is you add include server to the config method, set it to true, and then you add a dependency on the API library. And this lets you use API routes. So to define an API route, it's analogous to the page concept in the front end. You basically go under your API folder in your JVM main, and you define an API method, optionally suspendable. And just like that, we now have a working server with an endpoint that will respond with the hello world if you visit it. Calling it in the front end, you basically just call this simple window.api class, and it supports all of the HTTP verbs, get, post, update, and that's it. One thing that's really interesting is you're expected to set the status explicitly in your API routes. If you don't, it's going to automatically return a 404. The set body text method sets that for you, so that's why we didn't set it explicitly. But you'll notice here we're doing an early abort. So what this is saying is if someone tries to do a post request to this endpoint, they're going to get a 404. Let's actually look at a post case that's a little bit more complicated because it's interesting. This UI is actually taken from Afree's Cobweb site. I thought it was really nice, and I just wanted to show like how you might accomplish it. So what we're going to do, the skeleton of it, is we're going to define a new API route that is post type, so we abort if it's not. And when it finishes, we set the status to 200, which means OK. So we're going to need to read the data from the request that gets sent to us. We're going to need to write the message into a data store, which is often a database. So what I want to recommend here is let's apply the Kotlin serialization plugin and the library. And what we're going to do is we're going to use common code. So this is a fun use for multi-platform, right? So what I'm going to do here is create a data object in common main and make it serializable. Now that I have it, it's trivial. I'm just going to assume the front end is going to send that to me. So all I need to do is decode it, and then I'm good to go. That part is done. So now we need to write the message into a data store. I'm this random floating function. How can I get access to a data store? Well, the way that you do it in Cobweb is you annotate a method with init API. And any method annotated with init API will be called when a server is started up or live reloaded. And so what we've done here is in the init API call, we've set this data property, which is a mutable set. We've added this data store item into it, and we can query it from our API call. The API call gets a read-only view into this data set. Now we have everything we need. We check if we're a post call. We decode the incoming text. We then store it, and in this case, it's a random data store object, but for your case, it could be some database call. And then we let this client know that everything's OK. The client code is also easy. Because this is in common code, you just create your contact me message object, and then you use JSON serialization to convert it into a string and send it. That's it, working server. All right, so we're here. One thing I want to say is that most tech slides are one of two flavors. You either have someone giving a slides presentation or giving a live demo. And obviously, this is a slides presentation, except actually, it's not. This has been a Cobweb website that's been running the whole time. So basically what I did is I used Cobweb, and I used its Markdown support to define my slides, and I used Reveal.js, which is a really powerful open source JavaScript library, which is why all of the slides have this really powerful code highlighting and animating, and they also chose some really good text styles for me. This project is hosted at GitHub, and also the slides are also hosted as GitHub pages. There's probably no reason to watch the slides without me talking in front of them. However, you might want to go to it and see how I set up my GitHub CI in order to maybe see in your own project how you can check in code and have it automatically deploy a website for you. So just to recap, we learned a lot, although we really also only scratched the surface, and even in some of these concepts, we only scratched the surface of them. However, I hope you start to get the feel from what we've talked about for the shape of what a Cobweb project looks like. There were so many additional topics I wanted to talk about. I actually cut slides dealing with transitions and animations. API streams is a cool feature. It's like API routes, but persistent. Here, it would be really nice maybe to show you how to deploy to an actual service. And also, browser dev tools, it's like a game changer where you're working in the Kotlin code, and it basically creates your site that you can then inspect, and then you can iterate really quickly. And so it's definitely a flow that I want to show off. I'm not showing these things. There's no use for me to tell you what we could have covered, except I do want to emphasize that we have an active community. We have a Discord channel and a Kotlin Cobweb channel in the Kotlin Slack. I'm not going to post the links here because you could find them in the Cobweb README. But also user Stevzasan. He's a YouTube content creator. He created a course for Cobweb. This is an introductory free video he made that talks about how to basically create and build a Cobweb project. And this is really neat. He has a project, it's multi-platform, where it has a web and Android front end. They're different projects, but with a shared Cobweb backend. This is a application of multi-platform that I think I could really get behind because you're not actually sharing the UI, but I think in practice that's what happens in actual companies, but you can still share the business logic across these projects. And then there's a user Skyfish who also created a Cobweb tutorial that you can check out. He also does a bunch of videos about HTML and JavaScript. So yeah, it's surprisingly easy to make a website, and it's very satisfying. If you know what you're doing, you could have something up and running and host it on the internet in like an hour. So I'm hoping that Cobweb has encouraged at least one of you to maybe play around with web development, give it a try. And if you do, I hope you enjoy it as much as I have. So this is the GitHub link to the project. You can check it here, but also you can just search Google for it and it should show up. Also, this is my LinkedIn handle. Please feel welcome to connect with me. And if you do, let me know that you found me at DroidCon. Thank you very much. How much time do we have for questions?
I guess not.
Any? Perfect. Everything's self-explanatory. I'll be around, so if you come up with questions after or you want to ask about applying Cobweb to an actual project, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.